The Black Tulip Part 2 by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 28. The Hymn of the Flowers. Whilst the events we have described in our last chapter were taking place, the unfortunate Van Baerle, forgotten in his cell in the fortress of Lowenstein, suffered at the hands of Griffiths all that a prisoner can suffer when his jailer has formed the determination of playing the part of hangman. Griffiths, not having received any tidings of Rosa or of Jacob, persuaded himself that all that had happened was the devil's work, and that Dr. Cornelius van Baerle had been sent on earth by Satan. The result of it was that, one fine morning, the third after the disappearance of Jacob and Rosa, he went up to the cell of Cornelius in even a greater rage than usual. The latter, leaning with his elbows on the window-sill and supporting his head with his two hands, whilst his eyes wandered over the distant hazy horizon where the windmills of Dort were turning their sails, was breathing the fresh air. In order to be able to keep down his tears and to fortify himself in his philosophy. The pigeons were still there, but hope was not there. There was no future to look forward to. Alas, Rosa, being watched, was no longer able to come. Could she not write? And if so, could she convey her letters to him? No, no. He had seen during the 2 preceding days too much fury and malignity in the eyes of old Griffiths to expect that his vigilance would relax, even for one moment. Moreover, had not she to suffer even worse torments than those of seclusion and separation? Did this brutal, blaspheming, drunken bully take revenge on his daughter, like the ruthless fathers of the Greek drama? And when the Genièvre had heated his brain, would it not give to his arm, which had been only too well set by Cornelius, even double force? The idea that Rosa might perhaps be ill-treated nearly drove Cornelius mad. He then felt his own powerlessness. He asked himself whether God was just in inflicting so much tribulation on 2 innocent creatures, and certainly in these moments he began to doubt the wisdom of Providence. It is one of the curses of misfortune that it thus begets doubt. Van Baerle had proposed to write to Rosa, but where was she? He also would have wished to write to The Hague, to be beforehand with Griffiths, who, he had no doubt, would by denouncing him do his best to bring new storms on his head. But how should he write? Griffiths had taken the paper and pencil from him, and even if he had both, he could hardly expect Griffiths to dispatch his letter. Then Cornelius revolved in his mind all those stratagems resorted to by unfortunate prisoners. He had thought of an attempt to escape, a thing which never entered his head whilst he could see Rosa every day. But the more he thought of it, the more clearly he saw the impracticability of such an attempt. He was one of those choice spirits who abhor everything that is common, and who often lose a good chance through not taking the way of the vulgar, that high road of mediocrity which leads to everything. "How is it possible," said Cornelius to himself, "that I should escape from Lowenstein, as Grotius has done the same thing before me? Has not every precaution been taken since? Are not the windows barred? Are not the doors of double and even of treble strength, and the sentinels 10 times more watchful? And have not I, besides all this, an Argus, so much the more dangerous as he has the keen eyes of hatred? Finally, is there not one fact which takes away all my spirit, I mean Rosa's absence? But suppose I should waste 10 years of my life in making a file to file off my bars, or in braiding cords to let myself down from the window, or in sticking wings on my shoulders to fly, like Daedalus? But luck is against me now. The file would get dull, the rope would break, or my wings would melt in the sun. I should surely kill myself. I should be picked up maimed and crippled. I should be labeled and put on exhibition in the museum at The Hague between the blood-stained doublet of William the Taciturn and the female walrus captured at Stavesen, and the only result of my enterprise will have been to procure me a place among the curiosities of Holland. But no, and it is much better so. Some fine day Griffiths will commit some atrocity. I am losing my patience since I have lost the joy and company of Rosa, and especially since I have lost my tulip. Undoubtedly, some day or other Griffiths will attack me in a manner painful to my self-respect or to my love, or even threaten my personal safety. I don't know how it is, but since my imprisonment, I feel a strange and almost irresistible pugnacity. Well, I shall get at the throat of that old villain and strangle him. Cornelius, at these words, stopped for a moment, biting his lips and staring out before him. Then, eagerly returning to an idea which seemed to possess a strange fascination for him, he continued, "Well, and once having strangled him, why should I not take his keys from him? Why not go down the stairs as if I had done the most virtuous action? Why not go and fetch Rosa from her room? Why not tell her all and jump from her window into the wall? I am expert enough as a swimmer to save both of us. Rosa, but oh heaven, Griffiths is her father. Whatever may be her affection for me, she will never approve of my having strangled her father, brutal and malicious as he has been. I shall have to enter into an argument with her, and in the midst of my speech, some wretched turnkey who has found Griffiths with the death rattle in his throat, or perhaps actually dead, will come along and put his hand on my shoulder. Then I shall see the Buitenhof again, and the gleam of that infernal sword, which will not stop halfway a second time, but will make acquaintance with the nape of my neck. It will not do, Cornelius, my fine fellow. It is a bad plan. But then, what is to become of me, and how shall I find Rosa again?" Such were the cogitations of Cornelius 3 days after the sad scene of separation from Rosa, at the moment when we find him standing at the window. And at that very moment Griffiths entered. He held in his hand a huge stick, his eyes glistening with spiteful thoughts. A malignant smile played round his lips, and the whole of his carriage, and even all his movements betokened bad and malicious intentions. Cornelius heard him enter and guessed that it was he, but did not turn round, as he knew well that Rosa was not coming after him. There is nothing more galling to angry people than the coolness of those on whom they wish to vent their spleen. The expense being once incurred, one does not like to lose it. One's passion is roused, and one's blood boiling. So it would be labor lost not to have at least a nice little row. Griffiths, therefore, on seeing that Cornelius did not stir, tried to attract his attention by a loud umph, umph. Cornelius was humming between his teeth the hymn of flowers, a sad but very charming song. We are the daughters of the secret fire, of the fire which runs through the veins of the earth. We are the daughters of Aurora and of the dew. We are the daughters of the air. We are the daughters of the air. We are the daughters of the water. But we are, above all, the daughters of heaven. This song, the placid melancholy of which was still heightened by its calm and sweet melody, exasperated Griffiths. He struck his stick on the stone pavement of the cell and called out, "Halloa, my warbling gentleman, don't you hear me?" Cornelius turned around, merely saying, "Good morning," and then began his song again. Men defile us and kill us while loving us. We hang to the earth by a thread. This thread is our root, that is to say, our life. But we raise on high our arms towards heaven. "Ah, you accursed sorcerer, you are making game of me, I believe," roared Griffiths. Cornelius continued, "For heaven is our home, our true home, as from thence comes our soul. As thither our soul returns, our soul, that is to say, our perfume." Griffiths went up to the prisoner and said, "But you don't see that I had taken means to get you under and to force you to confess your crimes." "Are you mad, my dear Master Griffiths?" asked Cornelius. And, as he now for the first time observed the frenzied features, the flashing eyes, and foaming mouth of the old jailer, he said, "Bless the man, he is more than mad, he is furious." Griffiths flourished his stick above his head, but Van Baerle moved not, and remained standing with his arms akimbo. "It seems your intention to threaten me, Master Griffiths." "Yes, indeed, I threaten you," cried the jailer. "And with what? First of all, look at what I have in my hand." "I think that's a stick," said Cornelius calmly, "but I don't suppose you will threaten me with that." "Oh, you don't suppose? Why not?" "Because any jailer who strikes a prisoner is liable to two penalties. The first laid down in Article 9 of the regulations at Lowenstein: any jailer, inspector, or turnkey who lays hands upon any prisoner of state will be dismissed." "Yes, who lays hands," said Griffiths, mad with rage, "but there is not a word about a stick in the regulation." "And the second," continued Cornelius, "which is not written in the regulation, but which is to be found elsewhere." "Whosoever takes up the stick will be thrashed by the stick." Griffiths, growing more and more exasperated by the calm and sententious tone of Cornelius, brandished his cudgel, but at the moment when he raised it Cornelius rushed at him, snatched it from his hands, and put it under his own arm. Griffiths fairly bellowed with rage. "Hush, hush, my good man," said Cornelius. "Don't do anything to lose your place." "Ah, you sorcerer! I'll pinch you worse," roared Griffiths. "I wish you may. Don't you see my hand is empty?" "Yes, I see it, and I am glad of it. You know that it is not generally so when I come upstairs in the morning. It's true, you generally bring me the worst soup and the most miserable rations one can imagine. But that's not a punishment to me. I eat only bread, and the worse the bread is to your taste, the better it is to mine." "How so?" "Oh, it's a very simple thing." "Well, tell it me," said Griffiths, "very willingly. I know that in giving me bad bread you think you do me harm." "Certainly. I don't give it you to please you, you brigand." "Well then, I, who am a sorcerer, as you know, change your bad into excellent bread, which I relish more than the best cake. And then I have the double pleasure of eating something that gratifies my palate, and of doing something that puts you in a rage." Griffiths answered with a growl. "Oh, you confess, then, that you are a sorcerer." "Indeed, I am one. I don't say it before all the world, because they might burn me for it, but as we are alone, I don't mind telling you." "Well, well, well," answered Griffiths, "but if a sorcerer can change black bread into white, won't he die of hunger if he has no bread at all?" "What's that?" said Cornelius. "Consequently, I shall not bring you any bread at all, and we shall see how it will be after 8 days." Cornelius grew pale. "And," continued Griffiths, "we'll begin this very day. As you are such a clever sorcerer, why, you had better change the furniture of your room into bread. As to myself, I shall pocket the 18 sous which are paid to me for your board." "But that's murder," cried Cornelius, carried away by the first impulse of the very natural terror with which this horrible mode of death inspired him. "Well," Griffiths went on in his jeering way, "as you are a sorcerer, you will live notwithstanding." Cornelius put on a smiling face again and said, "Have you not seen me make the pigeons come here from Dort?" "Well," said Griffiths, "well, a pigeon is a very dainty morsel, and a man who eats one every day would not starve, I think." "And how about the fire?" said Griffiths. "Fire. But you know that I'm in league with the devil. Do you think the devil will leave me without fire?" "Why, fire is his proper element." A man, however healthy his appetite may be, would not eat a pigeon every day. Wagers have been laid to do so, and those who made them gave them up. Well, but when I am tired of pigeons, I shall make the fish of the wall and of the moose come up to me. Griffiths opened his large eyes, quite bewildered. "I am rather fond of fish," continued Cornelius. "You never let me have any. Well, I shall turn your starving me to advantage, and regale myself with fish." Griffiths nearly fainted with anger and with fright, but he soon rallied, and said, putting his hand in his pocket, "Well, as you force me to it," and with these words he drew forth a clasp knife and opened it. "Halloa, a knife?" said Cornelius, preparing to defend himself with his stick. Chapter 29, in which Van Baerle, before leaving Lowenstein, settles accounts with Griffiths. The two remained silent for some minutes, Griffiths on the offensive and Van Baerle on the defensive. Then, as the situation might be prolonged to an indefinite length, Cornelius, anxious to know something more of the causes which had so fiercely exasperated his jailer, spoke first by putting the question, "Well, what do you want after all?" "I'll tell you what I want," answered Griffiths. "I want you to restore to me my daughter Rosa." "Your daughter?" cried Van Baerle. "Yes, my daughter Rosa, whom you have taken from me by your devilish magic. Now, will you tell me where she is?" And the attitude of Griffiths became more and more threatening. "Rosa is not at Lowenstein," cried Cornelius. "You know well she is not. Once more, will you restore her to me?" "I see," said Cornelius. "This is a trap you are laying for me. Now, for the last time, will you tell me where my daughter is?" "Guess it, you rogue, if you don't know it." Only wait," growled Griffiths, white with rage and with quivering lips, as his brain began to turn. "Ah, you will not tell me anything? Well, I'll unlock your teeth." He advanced a step towards Cornelius and said, showing him the weapon which he held in his hands, "Do you see this knife? Well, I have killed more than 50 black cocks with it, and I vow I'll kill their master, the devil, as well as them." "But, you blockhead," said Cornelius, "will you really kill me? I shall open your heart to see in it the place where you hide my daughter." Saying this, Griffiths in his frenzy rushed towards Cornelius, who had barely time to retreat behind his table to avoid the first thrust. But as Griffiths continued, with horrid threats, to brandish his huge knife, and as, although out of the reach of his weapon, yet as long as it remained in the madman's hand, the ruffian might fling it at him, Cornelius lost no time, and availing himself of the stick, which he held tight under his arm, dealt the jailer a brailer of vigorous of that hand which held the knife. The knife fell to the ground, and Cornelius put his foot on it. Then, as Griffiths seemed bent upon engaging in a struggle which the pain in his wrist and shame for having allowed himself to be disarmed would have made desperate, Cornelius took a decisive step, belaboring his jailer with the most heroic self-possession, and selecting the exact spot for every blow of the terrible cudgel. It was not long before Griffiths begged for mercy, but before begging for mercy he had lustily roared for help, and his cries had aroused all the functionaries of the prison. 2 turnkeys, an inspector, and 3 or 4 guards made their appearance all at once, and found Cornelius still using the stick, with the knife under his foot. At the sight of these witnesses, who could not know all the circumstances which had provoked and might justify his offense, Cornelius felt that he was irretrievably lost. In fact, appearances were sadly against him. In one moment Cornelius was disarmed and Griffiths raised and supported, and, bellowing with rage and pain, he was able to count on his back and shoulders the bruises which were beginning to swell like the hills dotting the slopes of a mountain ridge. A protocol of the violence practiced by the prisoner against his jailer was immediately drawn up, and as it was made on the depositions of Griffiths, it certainly could not be said to be too tame, the prisoner being charged with neither more nor less than with an attempt to murder for a long time premeditated with open rebellion. Whilst the charge was made out against Cornelius, Griffiths, whose presence was no longer necessary after having made his depositions, was taken down by his turnkeys to his lodge, groaning and covered with bruises. During this time, the guards who had seized Cornelius busied themselves in charitably informing their prisoner of the usages and customs of Lowenstein, which however he knew as well as they did. The regulations had been read to him at the moment of his entering the prison, and certain articles in them remained fixed in his memory. Among other things, they told him that this regulation had been carried out to its full extent in the case of a prisoner named Matthias, who in 1668, that is to say 5 years before, had committed a much less violent act of rebellion than that of which Cornelius was guilty. He had found his soup too hot and thrown it at the head of the chief turnkey, who in consequence of this ablution had been put to the inconvenience of having his skin come off as he wiped his face. Matthias was taken within 12 hours from his cell, then led to the jailer's lodge, where he was registered as leaving Lowenstein, then taken to the Japine Esplanade, from which there is a very fine prospect over a wide expanse of country. There they fettered his hands, bandaged his eyes, and let him say his prayers. Hereupon he was invited to go down on his knees, and the guards of Lowenstein, 12 in number, at a sign from a sergeant, very cleverly lodged a musket ball each in his body. In consequence of this proceeding, Matthias incontinently did then and there die. Cornelius listened with the greatest attention to this delightful recital, and then said, "Ah, ah! Within 12 hours, you say?" "Yes, the 12th hour had not even struck, if I remember right," said the guard. Who had told him the story. "Thank you," said Cornelius. The guard still had the smile on his face with which he accompanied, and as it were accentuated his tale, when footsteps and a jingling of spurs were heard ascending the staircase. The guards fell back to allow an officer to pass, who entered the cell of Cornelius at the moment when the clerk of Lowenstein was still making out his report. "Is this No. 11?" he asked. "Yes, Captain," answered a non-commissioned officer. "Then this is the cell of the prisoner Cornelius van Baerle." "Exactly, Captain. Where is the prisoner?" "Here I am, sir," answered Cornelius, growing rather pale, notwithstanding all his courage. "You are Dr. Cornelius van Baerle?" asked he, this time addressing the prisoner himself. "Yes, sir." "Then follow me." "Oh, oh, oh!" said Cornelius, whose heart felt oppressed by the first dread of death. "What quick work they make here in the fortress of Lowenstein! And the rascal talked to me of 12 hours!" "Ah, what did I tell you?" whispered the communicative guard in the ear of the culprit. "A lie. How so? You promised me 12 hours." "Ah, yes, but here comes to you an aide-de-camp of His Highness, even one of his most intimate companions, Van Decken. Zounds, they did not grant such an honor to poor Matthias." "Come, come," said Cornelius, drawing a long breath. "Come, I'll show to these people that an honest burgher, godson of Cornelius de Witt, can without flinching receive as many musket balls as that Matthias." Saying this, he passed proudly before the clerk, who, being interrupted in his work, ventured to say to the officer, "But, Captain Van Deken, the protocol is not yet finished." "It is not worthwhile finishing it," answered the officer. "All right," replied the clerk, philosophically putting up his paper and pen into a greasy and well-worn writing case. "It was written," thought poor Cornelius, "that I should not in this world give my name either to a child, to a flower, or to a book, the three things by which a man's memory is perpetuated." Repressing his melancholy thoughts, he followed the officer with a resolute heart and carrying his head erect. Cornelius counted the steps which led to the esplanade, regretting that he had not asked the guard how many there were of them, which the man, in his official complacence, would not have failed to tell him. What the poor prisoner was most afraid of during this walk, which he considered as leading him to the end of the journey of life, was to see Griffiths and not to see Rosa. What savage satisfaction would glisten in the eyes of the father, and what sorrow dim those of the daughter! How Griffiths would glory in his punishment! Punishment! Rather savage vengeance for an eminently righteous deed, which Cornelius had the satisfaction of having performed as a bounden duty. But Rosa, poor girl! Must he die without a glimpse of her, without an opportunity to give her one last kiss, or even to say one last word of farewell? And worst of all, must he die without any intelligence of the Black Tulip, and regain his consciousness in heaven with no idea in what direction he should look to find it? In truth, to restrain his tears at such a crisis, the poor wretch's heart must have been encased in more of the ease triplex, the triple brass, than Horace bestows upon the sailor who first visited the terrifying Acroceraunian shoals. In vain did Cornelius look to the right and to the left. He saw no sign either of Rosa or Griffiths. On reaching the esplanade, he bravely looked about for the guards who were to be his executioners, and in reality saw a dozen soldiers assembled. But they were not standing in line or carrying muskets, but talking together so gaily that Cornelius felt almost shocked. All at once Griffiths, limping, staggering, and supporting himself on a crooked stick, came forth from the jailer's lodge. His old eyes, gray as those of a cat, were lit up by a gleam in which all his hatred was concentrated. He then began to pour forth such a torrent of disgusting imprecations against Cornelius that the latter, addressing the officer, said, "I do not think it very becoming, sir, that I should be thus insulted by this man, especially at a moment like this." "Well, hear me," said the officer, laughing. "It is quite natural that this worthy fellow should bear you a grudge. You seem to have given it him very soundly." "But, sir, it was only in self-defense." "Never mind," said the captain, shrugging his shoulders like a true philosopher. "Let him talk. What does it matter to you now?" The cold sweat stood on the brow of Cornelius at this answer, which he looked upon somewhat in the light of brutal irony, especially as coming from an officer of whom he had heard it said that he was attached to the person of the prince. The unfortunate tulip fancier then felt that he had no more resources and no more friends, and resigned himself to his fate. "God's will be done," he muttered, bowing his head. Then, turning towards the officer, who seemed complacently to wait until he had finished his meditations, he asked, "Please, sir, tell me now, where am I to go?" The officer pointed to a carriage, drawn by 4 horses, which reminded him very strongly of that which, under similar circumstances, had before attracted his attention at Butenhof. "Enter," said the officer. "Ah," muttered Cornelius to himself, "it seems they are not going to treat me to the honors of the esplanade." He uttered these words loud enough for the chatty guard, who was at his heels, to overhear him. That kind soul very likely thought it his duty to give Cornelius some new information, for, approaching the door of the carriage, whilst the officer, with one foot on the step, was still giving some orders, he whispered to Van Baerle, "Condemned prisoners have sometimes been taken to their own town to be made an example of, and have been executed before the door of their own house. It's all according to circumstances." Cornelius thanked him by signs, and then said to himself, "Well, here is a fellow who never misses giving consolation whenever an opportunity presents itself. In truth, my friend, I'm very much obliged to you. Goodbye." The carriage drove away. "Ah, you villain, you brigand!" roared Griffiths, clenching his fists at the victim who was escaping from his clutches. "Is it not a shame that this fellow gets off without having restored my daughter to me? If they take me to Dort," thought Cornelius, "I shall see, in passing my house, whether my poor boarders have been much spoiled." Chapter 30, wherein the reader begins to guess the kind of execution that was awaiting Van Baerle. The carriage rolled on during the whole day. It passed on the right of Dort, went through Rotterdam, and reached Delft. At 5 o'clock in the evening, at least 20 leagues had been traveled. Cornelius addressed some questions to the officer, who was at the same time his guard and his companion. But, cautious as were his inquiries, he had the disappointment of receiving no answer. Cornelius regretted that he had no longer by his side the chatty soldier who would talk without being questioned. That obliging person would undoubtedly have given him as pleasant details and exact explanations concerning this third strange part of his adventures as he had done concerning the first two. The travelers passed the night in the carriage. On the following morning at dawn, Cornelius found himself beyond Leyden, having the North Sea on his left and the Zuider Zee on his right. 3 hours after, he entered Haarlem. Cornelius was not aware of what had passed at Haarlem, and we shall leave him in ignorance of it until the course of events enlightens him. But the reader has a right to know all about it even before our hero, and therefore we shall not make him wait. We have seen that Rosa and the Tulip, like two orphan sisters, had been left by Prince William of Orange at the house of the President Van Sistens. Rosa did not hear again from the stadtholder until the evening of that day on which she had seen him face to face. Toward evening, an officer called at Van Sisten's house. He came from His Highness with a request for Rosa to appear at the town hall. There, in the large council room into which she was ushered, she found the prince writing. He was alone, with a large Frisian greyhound at his feet, which looked at him with a steady glance, as if the faithful animal were wishing to do what no man could do, read the thoughts of his master in his face. William continued his writing for a moment. Then, raising his eyes and seeing Rosa standing near the door, he said, without laying down his pen, "Come here, my child." Rosa advanced a few steps towards the table. "Sit down," he said. Rosa obeyed, for the prince was fixing his eyes upon her, but he had scarcely turned them again to his paper when she bashfully retired to the door. The prince finished his letter. During this time the greyhound went up to Rosa, surveyed her, and began to caress her. "Ah, ah," said William to his dog, "it's easy to see that she is a countrywoman of yours, and that you recognize her." Then, turning towards Rosa and fixing on her his scrutinizing and at the same time impenetrable glance, he said, "Now, my child." The prince was scarcely 23, and Rosa 18 or 20. He might therefore perhaps better have said, "My sister." "My child," he said with that strangely commanding accent which chilled all those who approached him, We are alone. Let us speak together." Rosa began to tremble, and yet there was nothing but kindness in the expression of the prince's face. "Monseigneur," she stammered, "you have a father at Loewestein?" "Yes, your highness." "You do not love him?" "I do not. At least, not as a daughter ought to do, Monseigneur." It is not right not to love one's father, but it is right not to tell a falsehood. Rosa cast her eyes to the ground. "What is the reason of your not loving your father?" "He is wicked." "In what way does he show his wickedness?" "He ill-treats the prisoners." "All of them." "All." "But don't you bear him a grudge for ill-treating someone in particular?" "My father ill-treats in particular Mynheer van Baerle, who—" "Who is your lover?" Rosa started back a step. "Whom I love, Monseigneur," she answered proudly. "Since when?" asked the prince. "Since the day when I first saw him." "And when was that?" "The day after that on which the Grand Pensionary John and his brother Cornelius met with such an awful death." The prince compressed his lips and knit his brow, and his eyelids dropped so as to hide his eyes for an instant. After a momentary silence, he resumed the conversation. "But to what can it lead to love a man who is doomed to live and die in prison? It will lead, if he lives and dies in prison, to my aiding him in life and in death." "And would you accept the lot of being the wife of a prisoner?" "As the wife of Mynheer van Baerle, I should under any circumstances be the proudest and happiest woman in the world." "But what?" "I dare not say, Monseigneur." "There is something like hope in your tone. What do you hope?" She raised her moist and beautiful eyes and looked at William with a glance full of meaning, which was calculated to stir up in the recesses of his heart the clemency which was slumbering there. "Ah, I understand you," he said. Rosa, with a smile, clasped her hands. "You hope in me?" said the prince. "Yes, Monseigneur." "Umph." The prince sealed the letter which he had just written, and summoned one of his officers, to whom he said, "Captain Van Degen, carry this dispatch to Loewestein. You will read the orders which I give to the governor, and execute them as far as they regard you." The officer bowed, and a few minutes afterwards the gallop of a horse was heard resounding in the vaulted archway. "My child," continued the prince, "the feast of the tulip will be on Sunday next, that is to say, the day after tomorrow. Make yourself smart with these 500 guilders, as I wish that day to be a great day for you." "How does your highness wish me to be dressed?" faltered Rosa. "Take the costume of a Frisian bride," said William. "It will suit you very well indeed." Chapter 31. Haarlem. Haarlem, whither 3 days ago we conducted our gentle reader, and whither we request him to follow us once more in the footsteps of the prisoner, is a pleasant city which justly prides itself on being one of the most shady in all the Netherlands. While other towns boast of the magnificence of their arsenals and dockyards, and the splendor of their shops and markets, Haarlem's claims to fame rest upon her superiority to all other provincial cities in the number and beauty of her spreading elms, graceful poplars, and, more than all, upon her pleasant walks, shaded by the lovely arches of magnificent oaks, lindens, and chestnuts. Haarlem, just as her neighbor Leyden became the center of science, and her queen, Amsterdam, that of commerce, Haarlem preferred to be the agricultural, or, more strictly speaking, the horticultural metropolis. In fact, girt about as she was, breezy and exposed to the sun's hot rays, she seemed to offer to gardeners so many more guarantees of success than other places, with their heavy sea air and their scorching heat. On this account all the serene souls who loved the earth and its fruits had gradually gathered together at Haarlem, just as all the nervous, uneasy spirits, whose ambition was for travel and commerce, had settled in Rotterdam and Amsterdam, and all the politicians and selfish worldlings at The Hague. We have observed that Leyden overflowed with scholars. In like manner, Haarlem was devoted to the gentle pursuits of peace, to music and painting, orchards and avenues, groves and parks. Haarlem went wild about flowers, and tulips received their full share of worship. Haarlem offered prizes for tulip growing, and this fact brings us in the most natural manner to that celebration which the city intended to hold on May 15, 1673, in honor of the great black tulip, immaculate and perfect, which should gain for its discoverer 100,000 guilders. Haarlem, having placed on exhibition its favorite, having advertised its love of flowers in general and of tulips in particular, at a period when the souls of men were filled with war and sedition, Haarlem, having enjoyed the exquisite pleasure of admiring the very purest ideal of tulips in full bloom, Haarlem, this tiny town, full of trees and of sunshine, of light and shade, had determined that the ceremony of bestowing the prize should be a feat which should live forever in the memory of men. So much the more reason was there, too, in her determination, in that Holland is the home of feats. Never did sluggish natures manifest more eager energy of the singing and dancing sort than those of the good republicans of the 7 provinces when amusement was the order of the day. Study the pictures of the 2 tenures. It is certain that sluggish folk are of all men the most earnest in tiring themselves, not when they are at work, but at play. Thus Haarlem was thrice given over to rejoicing, for a threefold celebration was to take place. In the first place, the black tulip had been produced. Secondly, the Prince William of Orange, as a true Hollander, had promised to be present at the ceremony of its inauguration. And thirdly, it was a point of honor with the States to show to the French, at the conclusion of such a disastrous war as that of 1672, that the flooring of the Batavian Republic was solid enough for its people to dance on it, with the accompaniment of the fleets. The Horticultural Society of Haarlem had shown itself worthy of its fame by giving 100,000 guilders for the bulb of a tulip. The town, which did not wish to be outdone, voted a like sum, which was placed in the hands of that notable body to solemnize the auspicious event. And indeed, on the Sunday fixed for this ceremony, there was such a stir among the people and such an enthusiasm among the townsfolk that even a Frenchman, who laughs at everything at all times, could not have helped admiring the character of those honest Hollanders, who were equally ready to spend their money for the construction of a man of war, that is to say, for the support of national honor, as they were to reward the growth of a new flower, destined to bloom for one day, and to serve during that day to divert the ladies. At the head of the notables and of the horticultural committee shone Mynheer van Sistens, dressed in his richest habiliments. The worthy man had done his best to imitate his favorite flower in the somber and stern elegance of his garments, and we are bound to record, to his honor, that he had perfectly succeeded in his object. Dark crimson velvet, dark purple silk, and jet black cloth, with linen of dazzling whiteness, composed the festive dress of the president, who marched at the head of his committee carrying an enormous nosegay, like that which 121 years later Monsieur de Robespierre displayed at the festival of the Supreme Being. There was, however, a little difference between the two, very different from the French tribune, whose heart was so full of hatred and ambitious vindictiveness, was the honest president, who carried in his bosom a heart as innocent as the flowers which he held in his hand. Behind the committee, who were as gay as a meadow and as fragrant as a garden in spring, marched the learned societies of the town, the magistrates, the military, the nobles, and the boors. The people, even among the respective republicans of the 7 provinces, had no place assigned to them in the procession. They merely lined the streets. This is the place for the multitude, which with true philosophic spirit waits until the triumphal pageants have passed, to know what to say of them, and sometimes also to know what to do. This time, however, there was no question either of the triumph of Pompey or of Caesar, neither of the defeat of Mithridates, nor of the conquest of Gaul. The procession was as placid as the passing of a flock of lambs, and as inoffensive as a flight of birds sweeping through the air. Haarlem had no other triumphers except its gardeners. Worshipping flowers, Haarlem idolized the florist. In the center of this pacific and fragrant cortege, the Black Tulip was seen. Carried on a litter, which was covered with white velvet and fringed with gold. The handles of the litter were supported by 4 men, who were from time to time relieved by fresh relays, even as the bearers of Mother Cybele used to take turn and turn about at Rome in the ancient days, when she was brought from Etruria to the Eternal City amid the blare of trumpets and the worship of a whole nation. This public exhibition of the tulip was an act of adoration rendered by an entire nation, unlettered and unrefined, to the refinement and culture of its illustrious and devout leaders, whose blood had stained the foul pavement of the Buitenhof, reserving the right at a future day to inscribe the names of its victims upon the highest stone of the Dutch Pantheon. It was arranged that the Prince Stadtholder himself should give the prize of 100,000 guilders, which interested the people at large, and it was. Thought that perhaps he would make a speech which interested more particularly his friends and enemies. For in the most insignificant words of men of political importance, their friends and their opponents always endeavor to detect and hence think they can interpret something of their true thoughts. As if your true politician's hat were not a bushel under which he always hides his light. At length the great and long expected day, May 15, 1673, arrived, and all Haarlem, swelled by her neighbors, was gathered in the beautiful tree-lined streets, determined on this occasion not to waste its applause upon military heroes or those who had won notable victories in the field of science, but to reserve their applause for those who had overcome nature and had forced the inexhaustible mother to be delivered of what had theretofore been regarded as impossible, a completely black tulip. Nothing, however, is more fickle than such a resolution of the people. When a crowd is once in the humor to cheer, it is just the same as when it begins to hiss. It never knows when to stop. It therefore, in the first place, cheered Van Systens and his nosegay, then the corporation, then followed a cheer for the people, and at last, and for once, with great justice, there was one for the excellent music with which the gentlemen of the town councils generously treated the assemblage at every halt. Every eye was looking eagerly for the heroine of the festival, that is to say, the Black Tulip, and for its hero in the person of the one who had grown it. In case this hero should make his appearance after the address we have seen worthy Van Systens at work on so conscientiously, he would not fail to make as much of a sensation as the stadtholder himself, but the interest of the interest with the munching piz, matching their Sunday clothes, and munching their heavy cakes, nor in the poor young peasants gnawing smoked eels as if they were sticks of vanilla sweetmeat. Neither is our interest in the lovely Dutch girls, with red cheeks and ivory bosoms, nor in the fat round heiners who had never left their homes before, nor in the sallow thin trabble. Our interest is in a smiling, sparkling face to be seen amid the members of the horticultural committee, in the person with a flower in his belt, combed and brushed, and all clad in scarlet, a color which makes his black hair and yellow skin stand out in violent contrast. This hero, radiant with rapturous joy, who had the distinguished honor of making the people forget the speech of Van Sistens and even the presence of the stadtholder, was Isaac Boxtel, who saw, carried on his right before him, the Black Tulip, his pretended daughter, and on his left in a large purse the 100,000 guilders in glittering gold pieces, towards which he was constantly squinting, fearful of losing sight of them for one moment. Now and then Boxtel quickened his step to rub elbows for a moment with Van Sistens. He borrowed a little importance from everybody to make a kind of false importance for himself, as he had stolen Rosa's tulip to effect his own glory, and thereby make his fortune. Another quarter of an hour, and the prince will arrive, and the procession will halt for the last time. After the tulip is placed on its throne, the prince, yielding precedence to this rival for the popular adoration, will take a magnificently emblazoned parchment, on which is written the name of the grower, and his highness, in a loud and audible tone, will proclaim him to be the discoverer of a wonder. That Holland, by the instrumentality of him, Boxtel, has forced nature to produce a black flower which shall henceforth be called Tulipadika by Castellati. From time to time, however, Boxtel withdrew his eyes for a moment from the tulip and the purse, timidly looking among the crowd, for more than anything he dreaded to descry there the pale face of the pretty Frisian girl. She would have been a spectre spoiling the joy of the festival for him, just as Banquo's ghost did that of Macbeth. And yet, if the truth must be told, this wretch, who had stolen what was the boast of man and the dowry of a woman, did not consider himself as a thief. He had so intently watched this tulip, followed it so eagerly from the drawer in Cornelius's dry room to the scaffold of the Butenhof, and from the scaffold to the fortress of Lostein. He had seen it bud and grow in Rosa's window, and so often warmed the air round it with his breath, that he felt as if no one had a better right to call himself its producer than he had, and anyone who would now take the black tulip from him as the thief. Yet he did not perceive Rosa. His joy, therefore, was not spoiled. In the center of a circle of magnificent trees, which were decorated with garlands and inscriptions, the procession halted amidst the sounds of lively music, and the young damsels of Haarlem made their appearance to escort the tulip to the raised seat which it was to occupy on the platform by the side of the gilded chair of His Highness the Stadtholder. And the proud tulip, raised on its pedestal, soon overlooked the assembled crowd of people, who clapped their hands and made the old town of Haarlem re-echo with their tremendous cheers. Chapter 32. A Last Request. At this solemn moment, and whilst the cheers still resounded, a carriage was driving along the road on the outskirts of the green on which the scene occurred. It pursued its way slowly on account of the flocks of children who were pushed out of the avenue by the crowd of men and women. This carriage, covered with dust and creaking on its axles, the result of a long journey, enclosed the unfortunate Van Baerle, who was just beginning to get a glimpse through the open window of the scene which we have tried with poor success, no doubt to present to the eyes of the reader. The crowd and the noise and the display of artificial and natural magnificence were as dazzling to the prisoner as a ray of light flashing suddenly into his dungeon. Notwithstanding the little readiness which his companion had shown in answering his questions concerning his fate, he ventured once more to ask the meaning of all this bustle, which at first sight seemed to be utterly disconnected with his own affairs. "What is all this, pray, Mynheer Lieutenant?" he asked of his conductor. "As you may see, sir," replied the officer, "it is a feast." "Ah, a feast," said Cornelius in the sad tone of indifference of a man to whom no joy remains in this world. Then, after some moments' silence, during which the carriage had proceeded a few yards, he asked once more, "The feast of the patron saint of Haarlem, as I see so many flowers?" "It is indeed a feast in which flowers play a principal part." "Oh, the sweet scents! Oh, the beautiful colors!" cried Cornelius. "Stop, that the gentleman may see," said the officer, with that frank kindliness which is peculiar to military men, to the soldier who was acting as postilion. "Oh, thank you, sir, for your kindness," replied Van Baerle in a melancholy tone. "The joy of others pains me. Please spare me this pang." "Just as you wish. Drive on." "I ordered the driver to stop because I thought it would please you, as you are said to love flowers, and especially that the feast of which is celebrated today." "And what flower is that?" "The tulip." "The tulip!" cried Van Baerle. "Is today the feast of tulips?" "Yes, sir. But as this spectacle displeases you, let us drive on." The officer was about to give the order to proceed, but Cornelius stopped him, a painful thought having struck him. He asked, with faltering voice, "Is the prize given today, sir?" "Yes, the prize for the Black Tulip." Cornelius's cheek flushed, his whole frame trembled, and the cold sweat stood on his brow. "Alas, sir," he said, "all these good people will be as unfortunate as myself, for they will not see the solemnity which they have come to witness, or at least they will see it incompletely." "What is it you mean to say?" "I mean to say," replied Cornelius, throwing himself back in the carriage, "that the Black Tulip will not be found, except by one whom I know." "In this case," said the officer, "the person whom you know has found it, for the thing which the whole of Haarlem is looking at this moment is neither more nor less than the Black Tulip." "The Black Tulip," replied Van Baerle, thrusting half his body out of the carriage window. "Where is it? Where is it? Down there on the throne, don't you see?" "I do see it." "Come along, sir," said the officer. "Now we must drive off." "Oh, have pity, have mercy, sir," said Van Baerle. "Don't take me away. Let me look once more. Is what I see down there the Black Tulip, quite black? Is it?" "Possible?" "Oh, sir, have you seen it? It must have specks. It must be imperfect. It must only be dyed black." "Ah, if I were there, I should see it at once." "Let me alight. Let me see it close, I beg of you." "Are you mad, sir? How could I allow such a thing? I implore you. But you forget that you are a prisoner." "It is true I am a prisoner, but I am a man of honor, and I promise you on my word that I will not run away. I will not attempt to escape. Only let me see the flower." "But my orders, sir, my orders." And the officer again made the driver a sign to proceed. Cornelius stopped him once more. "Oh, be forbearing, be generous. My whole life depends upon your pity. Alas, perhaps it will not be much longer. You don't know, sir, what I suffer. You don't know the struggle going on in my heart and mind. For after all, Cornelius cried in despair, if this were my tulip, if it were the one which has been stolen from Rosa. Oh, I must alight, sir. I must see the flower. You may kill me afterwards if you like, but I will see it. I must see it. Be quiet, unfortunate man, and come quickly back into the carriage, for here is the escort of His Highness the Stadtholder, and if the prince observed any disturbance or heard any noise, it would be ruin to me as well as to you. Van Baerle, more afraid for his companion than himself, threw himself back into the carriage, but he could only keep quiet for half a minute, and the first 20 horsemen had scarcely passed when he again leaned out of the carriage. Window, gesticulating imploringly towards the Stadtholder at the very moment when he passed. William, impassible and quiet as usual, was proceeding to the green to fulfill his duty as chairman. He held in his hand the roll of parchment, which, on this festive day, had become his baton. Seeing the man gesticulate with imploring mien, and perhaps also recognizing the officer who accompanied him, His Highness ordered his carriage to stop. In an instant, his snorting steed stood still at a distance of about 6 yards from the carriage in which Van Baerle was caged. "What is this?" the prince asked the officer, who at the first order of the Stadtholder had jumped out of the carriage and was respectfully approaching him. "Monseigneur," he cried, "this is the prisoner of state whom I have fetched from Loewestein, and whom I have brought to Haarlem according to your Highness's command." "What does he want?" "He entreats for permission to stop here for a minute." "To see the Black Tulip, Monseigneur," said Van Baerle, clasping his hands. "And when I have seen it, when I have seen what I desire to know, I am quite ready to die, if die I must, but in dying I shall bless your Highness's mercy for having allowed me to witness the glorification of my work." It was indeed a curious spectacle to see these two men at the windows of their several carriages, the one surrounded by his guards and all-powerful, the other a prisoner and miserable, the one going to mount a throne, the other believing. Himself to be on his way to the scaffold. William, looking with his cold glance on Cornelius, listened to his anxious and urgent request. Then addressing himself to the officer, he said, "Is this person the mutinous prisoner who has attempted to kill his jailer at Loewestein?" Cornelius heaved a sigh and hung his head. His good-tempered, honest face turned pale and red at the same instant. These words of the all-powerful prince, who by some secret messenger unavailable to other mortals had already been apprised of his crime, seemed to him to forebode not only his doom, but also the refusal of his last request. He did not try to make a struggle or to defend himself, and he presented to the prince the affecting spectacle of despairing innocence like that of a child, a spectacle which was fully understood and felt by the great mind and the great heart of him who observed it. "Allow the prisoner to alight, and let him see the Black Tulip. It is well worth being seen once." "Thank you, Monseigneur, thank you," said Cornelius, nearly swooning with joy, and staggering on the steps of his carriage. Had not the officer supported him, our poor friend would have made his thanks to His Highness prostrate on his knees with his forehead in the dust. After having granted this permission, the prince proceeded on his way over the green amidst the most enthusiastic acclamations. He soon arrived at the platform, and the thunder of cannon shook the air. Chapter 33. Conclusion. Van Baerle, led by 4 guards, who pushed their way through the crowd, sidled up to the Black Tulip, towards which his gaze was attracted with increasing interest the nearer he approached to it. He saw it at last, that unique flower which he was to see once and no more. He saw it at the distance of 6 paces and was delighted with its perfection and gracefulness. He saw it surrounded by young and beautiful girls, who formed, as it were, a guard of honor for this queen of excellence and purity. And yet, the more he ascertained with his own eyes the perfection of the flower, the more wretched and miserable he felt. He looked all around for someone to whom he might address only one question, but his eyes everywhere met strange faces, and the attention of all was directed towards the chair of state on which the stadtholder had seated himself. William rose, casting a tranquil glance over the enthusiastic crowd, and his keen eyes rested by turns on the 3 extremities of a triangle formed opposite to him by 3 persons of very different interests and feelings. At one of the angles Boxtel, trembling with impatience and quite absorbed in watching the prince, the gilders, the Black Tulip, and the crowd. At the other, Cornelius, panting for breath, silent, and his attention, his eyes, his life, his heart, his love, quite concentrated on the Black Tulip. And thirdly, standing on a raised step among the maidens of Haarlem, a beautiful Frisian girl, dressed in fine scarlet woolen cloth, embroidered with silver, and covered with a lace veil, which fell in rich folds from her headdress of gold brocade. In one word, Rosa, who, faint and with swimming eyes, was leaning on the arm of one of the officers of William. The prince then slowly unfolded the parchment and said with a calm, clear voice, which, although low, made itself perfectly heard amidst the respectful silence, which all at once arrested the breath of 50,000 spectators, "You know what has brought us here. A prize of 100,000 guilders has been promised to whosoever should grow the Black Tulip. The Black Tulip has been grown. Here it is, before your eyes, coming up to all the conditions required by the program of the Horticultural Society of Haarlem. The history of its production and the name of its grower will be inscribed in the book of honor of the city. Let the person approach to whom the Black Tulip belongs." In pronouncing these words, the prince, to judge of the effect they produced, surveyed with his eagle eye the 3 extremities of the triangle. He saw Boxtel rushing forward. He saw Cornelius make an involuntary movement, and lastly he saw the officer who was taking care of Rosa lead, or rather, push her forward towards him. At the sight of Rosa, a double cry arose on the right and left of the prince. Boxtel, thunderstruck, and Cornelius, in joyful amazement, both exclaimed, "Rosa! Rosa!" "This tulip is yours, is it not, my child?" said the prince. "Yes, monseigneur," stammered Rosa, whose striking beauty excited a general murmur of applause. "Oh!" muttered Cornelius. "She has then belied me when she said this flower was stolen from her. Oh, that's why she left Loewestein. Alas, am I then forgotten, betrayed by her whom I thought my best friend on earth? Oh," sighed Boxtel, "I am lost." "This tulip," continued the prince, "will therefore bear the name of its producer, and figure in the catalogue under the title Tulipa nigra rosa barlonsis, because of the name Van Baerle, which will henceforth be the name of this damsel." And at the same time William took Rosa's hand and placed it in that of a young man who rushed forth, pale and beyond himself with joy, to the foot of the throne, saluting alternately the prince and his bride, and who with a grateful look to heaven returned his thanks to the giver of all this happiness. At the same moment there fell at the feet of the President Van Sistens another man, struck down by a very different emotion. Boxtel, crushed by the failure of his hopes, lay senseless on the ground. When they raised him and examined his pulse and his heart, he was quite dead. This incident did not much disturb the festival, as neither the prince nor the president seemed to mind it much. Cornelius started back in dismay, when in the thief, In the pretended Jacob, he recognized his neighbor, Isaac Boxtel, whom, in the innocence of his heart, he had not for one instant suspected of such a wicked action. Then, to the sound of trumpets, the procession marched back without any change in its order, except that Boxtel was now dead, and that Cornelius and Rosa were walking triumphantly side by side in hand in hand. On their arriving at the Hôtel de Ville, the prince, pointing with his finger to the purse with 100,000 guilders, said to Cornelius, "It is difficult to say by whom this money is gained, by you or by Rosa, for if you have found the Black Tulip, she has nursed it and brought it into flower. It would therefore be unjust to consider it as her dowry. It is the gift of the town of Haarlem to the tulip." Cornelius wondered what the prince was driving at. The latter continued, "I give to Rosa the sum of 100,000 guilders, which she has fairly earned, and which she can offer to you. They are the reward of her love, her courage, and her honesty. As to you, sir, thanks to Rosa again, who has furnished the proofs of your innocence." And, saying these words, the prince handed to Cornelius that fly-leaf of the Bible, on which was written a letter of Cornelius de Witt, and in which the third bulb had been wrapped. "As to you, it has come to light that you were imprisoned for a crime which you had not committed. This means that you are not only free, but that your property will be restored to you, as the property of an innocent man cannot be confiscated. Cornelius van Baerle, you are the godson of Cornelius de Witt and the friend of his brother John. Remain worthy of the name you have received from one of them, and of the friendship you have enjoyed with the other. The two De Witts, wrongly judged and wrongly punished in a moment of popular error, were two great citizens, of whom Holland is now proud." The prince, after these last words, which, contrary to his custom, he pronounced with a voice full of emotion, gave his hands to the lovers to kiss, whilst they were kneeling before him. Then, heaving a sigh, he said, "Alas! You are very happy who, dreaming only of what perhaps is the true glory of Holland, and forms especially her true happiness, do not attempt to acquire for her anything beyond new colors of tulips." And, casting a glance towards that point of the compass where France lay, as if he saw new clouds gathering there, he entered his carriage and drove off. Cornelius started on the same day for Dort with Rosa, who sent her lover's old housekeeper as a messenger to her father to apprise him of all that had taken place. Those who, thanks to our description, have learned the character of old Griffiths will comprehend that it was hard for him to become reconciled to his son-in-law. He had not yet forgotten the blows which he had received in that. Famous encounter. To judge from the wheels which he counted, their number, he said, amounted to 41. But at last, in order, as he declared, not to be less generous than His Highness the Stadtholder, he consented to make his peace. Appointed to watch over the tulips, the old man made the rudest keeper of flowers in the whole of the 7 provinces. It was indeed a sight to see him watching the obnoxious moths and butterflies, killing slugs and driving away the hungry bees. As he had heard Boxtel's story, and was furious at having been the dupe of the pretended Jacob, he destroyed the sycamore behind which the envious Isaac had spied into the garden, for the plot of ground belonging to him had been bought by Cornelius and taken into his own garden. Rosa, growing not only in beauty but in wisdom also, after 2 years of her married life, could read and write so well that she was able to undertake by herself the education of 2 beautiful children which she had borne in 1674 and 1675, both in May, the month of flowers. as a matter of course, one was a boy, the other a girl, the former being called Cornelius, the other Rosa. Van Baerle remained faithfully attached to Rosa and to his tulips. The whole of his life was devoted to the happiness of his wife and the culture of flowers, and the latter of which occupations he was so successful that a great number of his varieties found a place in the catalogue of Holland. The two principal ornaments of his drawing-room were those two leaves from the Bible of Cornelius de Witt in large golden frames, one of them containing the letter in which his godfather enjoined him to burn the correspondence of the Marquis de Louvois, and the other his own will, in which he bequeathed to Rosa his bulbs under condition that she should marry a young man of from 26 to 28 years, who loved her and whom she loved, a condition which was scrupulously fulfilled, although, or rather because, Cornelius did not die. And to ward off any envious attempts of another Isaac Boxtel, he wrote over his door the lines which Grotius had, on the day of his flight, scratched on the walls of his prison. Sometimes one has suffered so much that he has the right never to be able to say, "I am too happy." The end. Thank you for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed the journey, the characters, and the world they carried with them. If you enjoyed this audiobook, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment below. Your support helps keep these stories alive and allows more timeless books to be shared with listeners around the world. Until next time, thank you for listening.